So, hello everybody. My dear colleagues, dear participants, thank you for your coming. Thank you, Nelson Diaz and Stephanie Hanke, for sharing your insights and your ideas. My name is Svetlana Alenitskaya from BPB, German Federal Agency for Civic Education. In short, in German, it's named BPB. I coordinate the network of participatory budgeting in Germany, and coming just now from our annual conference with very interesting topics. Tomorrow, for example, we are going to discuss how to reach hard to reachable people. I'm sure we could profit from the talk today evening, and if you speak German, you are kindly invited to join us tomorrow. But some was about this format today named BPB Connect. BPB Connect is a new platform created some months ago during the lockdown with the aim, the name of the program, to connect experts and to exchange information caused by COVID-19 pandemic with a focus of citizenship education. Our job in citizenship education is to translate current issues into the language of all people and to provide discussion platforms on different topics. September is our month of participatory budgeting, or in short PB. We started 2 weeks ago with a discussion about the current situation and the consequences of pandemic for PB in Russia, France, Portugal, and Kenya. Now we continue with the talk about the situation worldwide. The discussion will be led by Dr. Stephanie Hanke, an expert of PB in Germany and participatory processes in public authorities in Maghreb. Stephanie Hanke, Nelson Diaz, thank you for your coming, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, Svetlana, and a very warm welcome to everyone also from my side. Good evening. I'm very happy, and it's my privilege to be with Nelson Diaz tonight. He's from Portugal and a sociologist, an international consultant for PB. He is the Atlas coordinator for you have been coordinating the publication of the PB Atlas for the last 2 years, right? That's what you told me before, the last two editions. And he wrote several books on PBs worldwide. So he's the man to talk to when it comes to PBs worldwide. The World Atlas of PBs represents the widest compilation of data on PB worldwide. And it's a common work of more than 70 authors who voluntarily make themselves available to collect and analyze information. That's what I found on your website, Nelson. So please, can you briefly describe what you're doing? What is the PB World Atlas?
Hello, good evening, and thank you very much for this kindly invitation to be here with you. Well, the World Atlas of Participatory Budgeting is a book, is also a web page, a database, and a network of authors dedicated to knowledge production. And the Atlas is a very significant effort to map participatory budgeting in the world. Mm-hmm. In the first edition, published in 2019, last year, we were able to gather 76 authors from 71 countries in the world. And this work allowed us, for example, to identify more than 11,000 participatory budgeting in the world, to identify, analyze, and typify the 9 national laws on PB in the world. And at the same time, to analyze regional and continental trends in these processes and identify some of the most relevant innovations, and at the same time identify and understand the existing national PB models in countries such as Portugal and South Korea, for example, among other interesting informations.
Mm-hmm. So how do you measure, or how do you identify PBs? So do you have a definition what is a PB and what is not a PB? Or is this like, a variety of techniques and mechanisms?
Well, I think it's better to talk about principles and not about methodologies, because we can have different methodologies, but we need to maintain same principles. And in general, PB is a process where people can discuss and decide part of a budget.
Mm-hmm.
And this budget could be a municipal budget, a national budget, a budget from an association, a budget from a company, it depends. But this is the most important principle, in my opinion, the co-decision. It means people are invited to discuss priorities and to decide parts of the money where they want to spend the money they have. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is the main important principle.
And you mentioned the number, I'm very impressed by the number of 11,000 PBs worldwide. And did you detect or discover a global trend during the time you are in?
Yes. I think PB is an unprecedented phenomenon. Its geographical scope, it's much greater than the geographical scope of democracy itself. Because if you look at the map and you compare the map of democracy in the world and the map of PB in the world, they are different. And that's why I can say that the geographical scope of PB, it's much greater than the geographical scope of democracy. And let me share with you some of the main trends. Europe, in the last years, has become the continent with the largest number of PB experiences in the world, for example. A few years ago was Latin America. Mm-hmm. But since 2017, 2018, Europe has become the continent with the largest number of PB. Latin America, in particular, South America, is the continent in which there has been a very significant setback, mainly due to the political crisis in Brazil, which has affected these processes. We have a huge PB crisis in Brazil, where this process was born 30 years ago. Another trend is about the growth of PB in countries with authoritarian and hybrid regimes. Now we can say that we have a huge number of PB in this kind of countries, more than in countries with full democracies. Mm-hmm. As you can see, as you can know, if we use the democracy index of the Economist, they identify more or less 20 countries in the world classified like full democracies. And when we compare the distribution of PB around the world, we can identify more PBs in authoritarian regimes and hybrid regimes than in this group of full democracies. Well, this is just a statistical number. I mean, I'm talking about numbers of PB, not about qualitative finding. I mean, not about the quality of the processes, because it's not possible with the Atlas to assess the quality of these processes. That's why we decided to identify only the numbers and where these PB are located. But at the same time, I can say from my own knowledge that some PB in authoritarian countries are methodological, financially, and politically stronger than PB in some democratic countries. This is not a generalization, but I can say that this happens. Mm-hmm. And we have other trends, I think, very important. The creation of national legislations of PB in 9 countries is the most decisive variable in the huge expansion of these processes in the world. These 9 countries concentrated about 58% of existing PB. More or less 58, 60% of total PB in the world are concentrated in 9 countries: Peru, Ecuador, Dominican Republic, Poland, Angola in Africa, Indonesia, South Korea, and in Portugal. But in the case of Portugal, it's quite different, because we are talking about a legislation promoted by the Ministry of Education, in that says the following. Every year, the ministry transfer to each public school an additional amount to PB. I mean, each public school can organize their own PB with this transfer, with this additional transfer made by the Ministry of Education. And
sorry, Nelson, you're talking about Kenya now.
No, I'm talking about Portugal.
Portugal, sorry. Yes.
We have a national PB for public schools promoted by the government, by the Ministry of Education. And the ministry decided to create a legislation that obliged all public schools to do this. And with this law, each school received this additional amount to promote PB. And we are talking about more than 1,500 schools that received this additional transfer to carry out the process.
That for me is that, yes, that's what I discovered when I was preparing to our conversation. This fact that you already claimed on a previous panel, that there are more PB experiences in authoritarian and hybrid regimes rather than in so-called perfect democracies, whether I do not know if a perfect democracy exists in this world. But that is a finding that really fits and suits with my working experience. You know, in my daily work with Engagement Global, I bring together, I connect communities from Germany with communities in Tunisia, for instance. And in Tunisia, they have a very strong, in the constitution-rooted participatory budgeting process. And when they connect with people from Bavaria, from Germany, you know, the Bavarians always think, oh, we meet these people from Tunisia in order to tell them something about democracy. But then, for their surprise, they have to learn that Tunisia in this respect is much more advanced. So that is a really interesting finding. Thanks a lot. Yeah, for me, that was really interesting to learn as well.
This was a surprise also for us. We know that we have PB processes in authoritarian regimes, but now they are they represent a huge number in the world. But the majority of the processes are located in flawed democracies. I mean, 80 to 85% of PB in the world are located in flawed democracies. And we have 4% more or less in full democracies, and 10% more or less, 11% in authoritarian regimes and hybrid regimes, more or less.
Mm-hmm. And what are your findings now when we are talking about PBs in times of the COVID-19 pandemic? Do you have any striking examples of how the pandemic is being handled in terms of its impact on citizens' participation?
Well, I think it is still too early to draw consolidated conclusions about this, but it is, in my opinion, at least possible to anticipate 5 trends and 1 risk. about the trends.
Mm-hmm.
All democracies in the world have suffered restrictions on individual and group freedoms. We know this. In some countries, in some democratic countries, these restrictions may serve as a pretext for more autocratic ambitions. And in other countries, these are just transitional restrictions. At the same time, PB have suffered a huge worldwide shock. In particular, the processes that depend on face-to-face participation dynamics. I mean, people's assemblies and meetings, public meetings, because the rules, as we know, the rules of social confinement and social distance have prevented these processes from taking place. And as a result, there has been a very broad suspension of PB in various parts of the world. More or less 80 to 90% of PB in the world has suffered a shock with this pandemic situation. Another trend is the strengthening of digital participation processes. They are growing with this pandemic situation. Some PBs in the world have been fully adapted to internet platforms to avoid their suspension during the pandemic. And at the same time, some countries less affected by the pandemic have been able to carry out the PB process with greater normality. This is the example of Taiwan, for example.
Okay.
Also in Uruguay, in South America. On other hand, in Russia, as you know, I know, maybe you know because you had you organized another meeting like this. But in Russia, for example, it's a different situation. We know that it is one of the most affected countries in the world with this pandemic. But the peak of the pandemic corresponded to a period when all face-to-face PB activities, I mean, information campaign, capacity buildings events, public discussions, workshops, voting events, for the next year cycle have been completed in the majority of the regions. I mean, the peak of pandemic corresponded to a period when all these moments, face-to-face PB moments, have been completed. Mm-hmm. So they didn't suffer so much PB, I mean, with the pandemic situation. And the risk, we have a risk. So we have 5 trends, but we have also a risk. And we don't know the result of this for the next year or for until the end of the year, for example. But the risk associated with this pandemic and the stoppage of PB is the possibility that many will not be resumed. Everything will depend on the circumstances and political will. Mm-hmm. We know that the virus will be controlled. I mean, we know that the virus will be controlled, but will not disappear from the planet. And if the situation is not controlled next year, then the risk of widespread shutdown will be greater. I mean, maybe we can return to our normal life and to our normal activities in 2021, but we don't know. And it happens the same with PB. We now in 2020, we have a huge stop of PB around the world. And if the situation doesn't change so much for 2021, we can continue in this situation for 2 years. And this could be crucial for the success of these processes. I mean, so it's not good to stop 1 year, but it's worse if we need to stop 2 years, these PB processes.
You mentioned the Russian example, Nelson, and we were actually, last time we were here on the internet chat on PV, we were talking exactly about authoritarian reflexes on cutting back now, taking advantage of the situation and taking the opportunity to cut back on participation, something that is really, that suits some authoritarian regimes. But also there is this political will that you mentioned. On the other hand, we have definitely an economic crisis that is already appearing at the horizon, internationally speaking. And so what about countries where this economic crisis will really hit hard and the budget will go down, and so there is not so much to share?
Well, we don't have any elements until now to take some conclusions about this. We know that with the pandemic situation, PB stopped around the world, but because of this sanitary crisis, not about financial crisis. So we don't know in the next year if these public institutions that promote PB will be in a different economic situation, if they can return to PB activities or not. Now we know they have one public reason to stop this. It was necessary to stop because of this pandemic situation, but we don't have any elements to tell us that the problem was like financial crisis or budgeting crisis. We don't have any elements to say this.
Mm-hmm. We have, you know, that we have our chat open and that our listeners are invited to participate. And we have Carsten Herzberg, who is asking in German if there is no possibility for him to talk with us, or if he was choosing the wrong technical buttons. And there is an administrator who's just telling him, okay, I can switch you on, so he can.
Great. I know Carsten. Great that is here.
Okay, so let me, we're waiting for him to appear and then he can discuss with us. Let me just continue with another question. Some people claim that participation increases inequality. You know, normally it's like participation is always good in terms of democracy, in terms of legitimation, but it can also increase inequality. Can you confirm this?
I don't have any elements to confirm that participation increases. Carsten, that participation increases inequality. Participation is a dependent variable, in my opinion. This means that it depends on the trust it is able to generate in people. With the crisis and the retreat of democracy in the world, I believe that participatory budgeting will grow because it is like a counter-cyclical tool against the crisis of democracy itself. So, and this is what happens if we compare the maps of democracy during the last 10 years in the world. We are in a huge crisis of democracy with less countries every year that promotes democracy. At the same time, the map of participatory budgeting is growing every year. So my idea is PB. It's like an instrument to fight against democracy crises, and but the success of PB depends of some variables. One of the variables is political will, to have a good methodology, to have a strong civil society, to put public money on this. But I don't have this opinion that participation increases inequality. I think participation gives the opportunity to create a more equality, I think.
Okay.
This is my opinion. But it depends. It's not possible to say this in general.
In general, yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about principles, of course, because in German could be different. Portugal could be different of Brazil or United States or Canada. It depends. We are not the same. We don't have the same processes. We don't have the same methodologies with the same administrative conditions, the same political will, the same resources. So it's not possible to generalize ideas about this, but I think in principle, participation increase equality.
Okay, Carsten Herzberg, please go ahead with your question.
Oh, hi, Nelson, and hi, Stephanie. Nice to see you.
Nice to see
so it's
you.
a good opportunity to
Long time ago.
that way. So yeah, I'm sorry. I joined the meeting relatively late. So my question is more, so I started a youth project, and I just ask you if you can, well, you have this worldwide overview now. That's very interesting, I think, for us. And so I ask you if you can say something about the participation of younger people, and if there are some interesting projects. That so must not be only very young people like kids, but also young people between 16 and 20 or 24. And yeah.
Well, I think this is one of the main trends of PB in the last few years. We can see that it's growing, the number of PB with young people. Just to give you an example, in Portugal and in United States, we have a majority of processes, of PB processes promoted by schools, by public schools to young people, than PB promoted by municipalities. We have a majority of processes in these two countries, but in other countries, we have a huge number of PB with young people. In Europe, several experiences promoted in different countries. Also in South America, but also in Asia, for example. In Russia, they are very committed to promote this with schools in different regions, like in Sakhalin. In Sakhalin, in the west part of the country, they have the biggest PB, the biggest young PB in the world, with 5 million euros in the process. Wow. So I think this is one of the trends, one of the most interesting news about PB in the world, and I think we have all the conditions to continue this grow for the next years. At the same time, I think this is an opportunity for local governments that don't trust so much in PB, but they want to try. It's an easy way to promote PB with young people than with the adults. They think they have less risks if they promote this with young people. So, but in terms of methodology, of course, it's different. And it's necessary to put more resources in PB process with young people to transform this process in an educational opportunity about citizenship, about democracy, about participation. It's not only about money, it's also an opportunity to develop the citizenship, to create a new culture of participation, to create more critical people and more active people in their own communities.
So what I experienced myself in Germany is this kind of youth parliament or youth council, where the youth in a certain community, in a town or locality, really gets a certain budget, which is sometimes, if the city is rich enough, quite a lot of money to distribute to youth according to the projects they're promoting. So I know that in Germany it is already rather common, yes.
And if it's possible, just let me add something about this. Just to give you the example of my country in Portugal. Several years ago, it was like a desert without PB. Public institutions without participation. Now in 2020 or 2019, last year, for a young person, for example, that lives in Lisbon or in Cascais or in Valongo, in different municipalities, this young person can have the opportunity to participate in the PB in the school, the PB promoted by the municipality, the PB promoted by the national government. So one young person, or young people, they have today the opportunity to experiment, to participate in different PB processes. And this is very important to create an ecosystem of participation where we are invited to think about our school, about our municipality, but also about our country. And this is very important. And I think it's a great opportunity for all of us that work on PB.
Yeah. Herr Herzberg, is this your question or you have any other question? I'm just checking with Svetlana because here on the chat there are some more people claiming some questions, and I'm just clarifying with Svetlana if it has already been answered or not.
No, for me it's answered. Thank you. I have another question, but if there are other people who have also questions, they should come first. So I will come back later.
Okay. Here is a question for understanding. What does stronger PB in authoritarian states mean? Are more people participating? Are the decisions more often brought to reality? Yeah, that is another aspect of PB decision making. Sometimes the decisions are made but not realized afterwards in terms of realization of a project.
Well, if we talk about methodology, I think we can identify very good PB in these authoritarian regimes, okay? In terms of methodology, I'm not talking about political will, because it's possible to implement PB in several authoritarian countries and not use the word of democracy, okay? It's possible to do PB and not talk about democracy. For us, this doesn't make sense because PB is an instrument to promote democracy. But in these countries, no, it's just an instrument to create a social image of good governance, transparency, dialogue, and don't say the word democracy. Okay? But this is good or bad? Well, in my opinion, it's good. Okay? You can do this, and the government can do this with their own objectives, but at the same time, people can try, people can experiment a different culture, a different situation, to have power to decide, and with this, maybe in the future, they can do other things. So it's a way to start to change these kind of situations. And for these authoritarian regimes, it's not a problem to take part of the money and, okay, you can decide, and you don't discuss the regime.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Oh, okay, yeah.
We are authoritarian, but at the same time, you can decide public money. We can dialogue, we can show you that we have transparency, good governance. This is not the best situation, but I think it's good. It's a beginning of something. And I know I have friends, I have colleagues in these countries that are very committed to change this and to use PB like a beginning of something, transform this reality. And I think they are doing a great job there. Well, it's not, I cannot say this in general. I know some different situations, and we have good PBs in some part of the world, in some part of these authoritarian regimes. Better than in some democratic countries, for example.
Yeah, sometimes people have the impression in so-called consolidated or well-established democracies that you can talk a lot, but you don't change anything. So that is leading to frustration as well.
Yeah, yes, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. So with that is, Svetlana was always insisting on this aspect on how to increase participation. You know, that is one point of Western societies, that people become frustrated. They have the feeling that there are so heavy regulations, everything is ruled, no real space for being creative or innovation. So yeah, they don't really feel like participate. So how would you motivate them? How can participation be increased? Well, I know it's a question politicians are being asked every day nowadays.
The question for 1 million.
Yes, exactly.
So maybe I don't have an answer for this, because it depends of the context. It depends of the culture of the administration, of political will, of civil society. Depends on the rules of the process. But I know one thing. We need to create something that change trust of people in institutions and in the process. I know, for example, some examples in Portugal, just if you give me this opportunity to talk about some experiences in my country. We have different situations here. We have at municipal level, we have very good experiences. And I know that if any of this local government wants to stop PB for the next year, for example, it's impossible. They don't have a law that oblige to do this, but they have a civil society very strong that wants this, that fight for this. And this is not a law, but it's like an institution. I mean, PB, it's not a law in these municipalities, but it's like an institution, and people want this and fight for this. And it's not easy. I think it's not possible for any local government in these situations to cancel the process. But at the same time, we have situations of PBs that they don't have any support, any political support or any social support, and these are like a very weak processes. So this is not an answer, but what can I say about this? We need to create something different, where people can trust, because people don't trust in politicians, people don't trust in institutions, people don't trust in society. People trust in family, in friends, and we want to implement PB in this context of mistrust. So if we want to change, and if we want to increase participation, we need to create something where people can trust. That makes the difference. And this means that to give real power to real people, to decide public money, to change priorities, to implement the priorities, and this could change the trust of people in the processes, because they can still and don't trust on politicians and in public institutions, but maybe if they trust on the processes, maybe this could be different and make the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you very much. I think trust is a key word, and it reminds me to my time in the Dominican Republic. I was living in the Dominican Republic for 4 years, and you know, it's one of the most corrupt places in the world, probably. But you have really stunning examples of good functioning PBs. And
they have a law, they have a national law.
They have a national law, exactly. And they have a very strong civil society, and they have a very strong Jesuit civil society organization working with them. And for me, that was one of the driving factors to create this trust, for instance. I don't want to say that the church is always creating trust, but in this case, it worked out very well.
Yeah, it's true. I agree with you. We have very good examples of PB in Dominican Republic. And I think the PB there created a different culture of participation. And now we can see that they have, for example, a national group. It's a social movement defending the idea of a PB at national level. They want to discuss this with the government, why our municipalities are obliged to do this and why the government don't do this at national level. So this is a very good debate promoted by civil society.
Civil society.
In the Republic. So, but at the same time, for example,
and they have an Observatorio del Presupuesto Público, something we do not have in Germany. No, I mean, not at the same level.
And this is promoted by the National Association of Municipalities in FEDOMO.
FEDOMO, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they promoted this. But at the same time, for example, the legislation in Dominican Republic, well, they oblige municipalities to do this, but if they don't do, they don't suffer anything. So they have a debate to do this, about this, I think.
Oh. Yeah, but it's a really interesting discussion because you find really spots and spaces of really strong PBs where you do not expect them in the world, as you said before. And even if you have a nice etiquette or envelope, good democracy, it doesn't mean that you have strong participation.
Yeah, this is what I think. Well, I don't have answers for everything, of course, but why we have less PB in full democracies than in authoritarian regimes? Because I think it's just one idea, it's not a conclusion because I don't have elements to say this, but I think that the governments, local or national governments in countries with full democracies believes that they have a very good regime and they don't need this kind of participation. Yeah. Maybe this is one of the answers to understand this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you very much, Nelson. So are there any more questions from the public? No, I do not see any more popping up in the chat. No. Okay, Nelson. So would you have some final closing remarks, something you would like to share?
Well, I just to think about the future, I don't have a crystal ball, and the moment we are experiencing, the moment that we are living is one of great uncertainty and unpredictable. So before the pandemic, the tendency of PB was strong growth before the pandemic. I believe that this year and maybe in the next year, we will experience a phase of regression, but maybe in 2022, we can have a new expansion of PB in the world. I think we need 2 years to return to this high number of PBs in the world. But of course, this will depend on many other variables, including political will, in political tensions, elections, whatever. So let's see. But I think now we know that we have a huge stock of PB. Maybe this could continue in 2021. It depends of the situation, but maybe in 2022 we are in a better condition to return to our normal PB activities.
So it would be great if we would have the opportunity next year to talk again, to see how things evolved and what is the global trend then in 6 months' time or 1 year time. So Svetlana, I hope you listen to this.
Yeah, I do.
So Nelson, thank you so much to share your really vast, impressive knowledge with us. That was a really very interesting insight worldwide.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share the ideas with you. It was also a moment to learn from your experience. So thank you very much for your invitation.
Thank you. Thank you for your insights.
Nice to see you. Yeah, okay. See you soon. And take care. Yeah,
thank you. Thank you for your insights. And we'll bring the insights into the discussion tomorrow into our conference. And as for me, I would like to say thank you to you, Nelson and Stephanie, for the discussion and for your information. And a small short announcement. The next BPB Connect will be in 2 weeks on 5th October about the situation in Eastern Europe. But not about the topic of participatory budgeting, but about the situation in the countries. We changed the format a little bit, and we are going to present a series of short events about different aspects of countries of Eastern Partnership. For example, situation in Belarus is very interesting at the moment. Russia, youth work, online instruments, trainings, and so on. All information will be published on bpbconnect.eu. Stay connected. Have a nice evening. See you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.